Hello everybody. As my friends know me, I usually like to engage them in the social media by posts, which is discussing opinions, news, historical issues, and things like this. The new thing today that I would like to test new visualization for my ideas and my posts. So I use this Prezi presentation technology to have more engaging and interactive post with you. And the topic that I will talk about today, I think it's new topic and many Egyptians never heard about, and even many people in the West never recognized it and never heard about. Even for me, this was big surprise. Most of the informations that I found about the topic. The topic is the Egyptian-North Korean relationships. What is the facts? What is the gossips? What is the lies which had been circulated in the media recently about it? Actually, the first time this topic had been in the surface was after year 2008, after the Egyptian former army chief of staff, General Shazli, had published his book. And in this book, for the first time, we ever heard about North Korean direct involvement in the war with Egypt against Israel in 1973, and a lot of informations in the book have been surfaced about how the North Koreans was helping us in a very critical moment with very critical important aid, with the military supplies, spare parts, MiG-21 complete squadron, about 100 aeroplane, and many other informations. I will show it to you. But what had been really interesting me, it was from 3-4 years ago, there was a lot of media coverage had been circulated about the growing relations between Egypt and North Korea, and about how worrying is this relation, and about how Cairo can use this relation in arm deals, or maybe Cairo was some kind of sale agent for this North Korean systems and arms. But before I will go to the Western media coverage about the topic, I would like to talk about the beginning, how this relation started and why it became so strong and so important. I will start by the 50s. In the 50s, during General Nasser, Nasser, as we all know, was member in the non-alignment movement. He was one of the founders of this movement, and in this movement, there was a lot of other leaders, like the North Korean leaders and also the Indonesian leaders, and even Joseph Tito from Yugoslavia and Nehru from India. And from the first days of this organization, Nasser growing relations, personal relation with those leaders, and the North Korean leadership is one of those leaders. And Egypt opened embassies in North Korea from the beginning of the 50s, and North Korea had embassy in Egypt since the 50s. The relation had been solidarity all the time in the UN and in the during the vote in the UN and in the International Security Council, if it's related to the Korean War or the Korean matter or the Egyptian and the Middle Eastern matter. And the North Korean with other non-alignment movement members had played good role or important role at that time to stabilize the world and the region, especially that all these countries was newly independent countries, and they needed some kind of solidarity between them and support. The first important test for this relation was during the Suez Crisis, and as we all know that England and France and Israel attacked the Suez Canal in Egypt, and there was a lot of casualties from the Egyptian side, and Port Said have been destroyed, as you see in the photos. The oil refineries targeted, the airport targeted, but the rule of North Korea was really supportive for the Egyptian side. There was official statements supporting us. There was standing beside us in the UN meetings. There's even more than 60,000 won, which is the North Korean currency, had been granted for Egypt as a North Korean aid, plus vegetables and food and wheat and agricultural products as a North Korean support for Egypt. Of course, North Korea at that time was also still not developed, and they had a lot of problems. So the Egyptian side considered this support some kind of respectable relation, and there was gratitude from the Egyptian side and the Egyptian authorities towards North Korea and the North Korean leaderships at that time. But there was other aspect, other also side for this relation. Many are connecting the relation between South Korea and Israel with this growing strong relation between North Korea and Egypt, because at the same period, in the 60s, North Korea had established its diplomatic mission in Israel, and the opposite, exchanging embassies and ambassadors, and even Israel was sending Israeli soldiers as a part of the UN peacekeepers in Korea, between South and North Korea. But the North Koreans was so suspicious that these relations, it's not about peace keepers, but the Israelis are supporting the South Koreans, and because Israel and South Korea are allies with the United States, the North Koreans was trying to pressure Israel that it stop any kind of development of its military relation with South Korea. General Nasser died in the beginning of the 70s, and now there is new leadership. Many expected that because the new leader in Egypt, Anwar Sadat, had went far from the Soviet Union, there was a lot of problems between him and the Soviets. He even kicked out the Soviet expertise, the military expertise, in the beginning of 1973. He even ended the so-called Soviet Egyptian peace or friendship treaty and cooperation treaty, and he went so close to the United States and to the West. He even, with a partnership with Americans, he succeeded to secure peace agreement in Camp David in the end of the 70s. And as we see here, the Soviet propaganda was so aggressive against this growing positive relation between Egypt and the West and the United States, and many of the regimes which is close to the Soviet Union, like the Syrian regime, the Iraqi regime, the Libyan regime, at that time they all was criticizing the Egyptian leadership and the new peace agreement and the Sinai interim, which was sponsored by the United States and have been signed in Geneva, and a lot of criticism for this growing relation. But many expected that North Korea, as master of the Soviet friends, will also cut the relations with Egypt and will start also through criticizing Egypt. Actually, the case of North Korea was very unique from my point of view. North Korea supported these Egyptian steps, even healed the peace agreement and the peace negotiations, congratulate the Egyptian side by official statement, and more importantly, what was the role of North Korea in the war? Here there is a very exciting story actually. In 1973, in March 1973, Egypt was preparing for the war. The war started in October 1973. This war was launched to liberate our lands from Israel. And in this war, there was two states involved directly and publicly, Egypt and Syria was preparing to launch attack against the Israelis. But many don't understand or don't know that North Korea had a role in this. And the story starts by March 1973. There was a group of officials, North Korean officials, military officials from North Korea, came and visited Cairo, and they had requests. In this request, they wanted to visit the front line, and they wanted to meet General Shazli. He was the chief of staff and the man who is responsible about preparing for the upcoming war. And they had a meeting with General Shazli. According to General Shazli's book and many documents released later from the Egyptian and the North Korean side, these meetings had resulted that General Shazli and the Egyptian leaders told the North Koreans that they are preparing for war, but we have a big problem. We don't have enough pilots to operate the MiG-21, which was the backbone of the air forces at that time. MiG-21 was a very important airplane at that time. It's a so-called interceptor, which is very good for attack and dogfighting and things like this. But we don't have enough Egyptian fighters. I was wondering when I read this for the first time why we don't have enough Egyptian fighters and how we was operating before this. And I discovered that we lost a lot of pilots during the 6 Days War and the battles which followed, but also we didn't have enough pilots even later, so the Soviet Union was supplying us with pilots and maintenance crew and spare parts and aeroplanes. There was 20,000 Soviet expertise in Egypt, 100 of them was pilots specialists in operating MiG-21. As I told you before, Anwar Sadat kicked out the Soviets from Egypt. All the 20,000 expertise had been kicked out from Egypt. But why Anwar Sadat kicked out those expertise even he was planning for an upcoming war? Many resources and many resources near from the decision maker at that time said that Sadat didn't like the way the Soviets acting. The Soviets didn't supply us with the weapons or the ammunition or the spare parts at the moments that we want. They even had their political conditions. They want us not to fight, not to replay, except by their permission, which considered by Anwar Sadat something against the sovereignty over the country and against the future of the upcoming war that Anwar Sadat is planning for. He wanted to have the initiative. He wanted to have the 100% of control of this battle, and if there is peace will come later, he wanted to be so free-handed that he can move politically. So the story now started that the Egyptian leaders and Shazli told the North Korean leaders about the problem. And he suggested that North Korea will supply Egypt with the spare parts of the MiG-21 and maintenance crew, and if they are so generous to supply us with few tens of MiG-21. But why he asked North Korea about this? Here's the point. North Korea at that time had a lot of licenses from the Soviet Union to manufacture Soviet Union-based or technology based on the Soviet Union products, tanks, missiles, rifles, aeroplanes. They was even making spare parts for the MiG-21, and further also North Koreans had developed even their own versions, like the AK-47 rifle, which was very modern version from the Kalashnikov or of the Kalashnikov. So after 2 weeks, the North Korean leaders returned back to Pyongyang and they discussed with their political leader, and they had a conclusion that they must supply Egypt with the weapons that Egypt asked, not even this. They will supply Egypt with 30 pilots to operate the MiG-21 squadron, and they will supply Egypt with aeroplanes even, and spare parts and maintenance, and even technology transfer, not only in the airplanes, but for the missiles and many other things. But why? Many resources here, and General Shazli publishing in his book that the North Korean had conclusion or had idea that it will come soon, a moment that North Korea will be in a direct military clash with South Korea. And they believe that South Korea, with its close relation with Israel and the United States, South Korea will depend on the same weapons that Israel using and the same tactics, because they also having common strategic military partnership and industries and also training. So North Korea want to come to be in the Egyptian side, to watch carefully how the Israelis will react, what is the tactics that the Israelis use, what is the weapons that they are using, how is the effectiveness of the Israeli air defense umbrella, because it's the same that South Korea is using. So this was the point of view of North Korea, why they're going to be involved in this kind of direct confrontation in Egypt with Israel. So this is the story you can find here, for example, in Business Insider. They talk here about Israel faced North Korea in Yom Kippur. Actually, this is exaggeration, because all the documents, even which have been published in North Korea, Israel didn't face North Korea directly in Yom Kippur. But after day 20 October, there was direct confrontation over the Suez Canal. And actually, from all these informations and these historical records, you can understand that there is a historical sympathetic between the Egyptian institution, the military institution, and the North Koreans. You can find here, for example, in the entrance of the Suez Canal, there is island in the Suez Canal, and in this island there is some of the headquarters of the Egyptian army, and there is cemetery also for the Egyptian army for the victims who died during the 1973 war. And in the middle, you can find this. This is the AK-47, which was North Korean developed rifle, which had been granted for Egypt. Even we granted a license also to manufacturing it at that time. So I think even this symbol, it's symbolizing the deep and strong relations from the military point of view between the two military institutions. But what about the relations after the peace agreement and after Egypt became important American and Western ally in the region? The relation kept strong, and you can see here, as you see in the photos, Mubarak kept visiting North Korea, and the North Korean leaders was visiting frequently Egypt. Even there was no deals, no business, no real visible military relations, but at least there was still diplomatic relations, and Egypt was always against the sanctions against North Korea, and there was always voting against these sanctions in the UN. But what about the business? In 2008 and 2010, there was a lot of visits between the Egyptian businessman Naguib Sawiris and he met here, as you see in the photos, the North Korean leaders, and the North Korean leaders was very happy by these relations, and they granted him a very rare opportunities never have been granted for a foreign investor before in North Korea. License to operate 5-star hotels, license to establish skyscraper, as you see here, license to operate and own internet network, mobile network phone, phone sale agent, and so on, which was a very rare opportunity. And Naguib Sawiris, by the way, he is one of the wealthiest businessmen in Middle East and Egypt. His family wealth worth $10 billion according to Forbes, and more, of course, because this is older estimation. But this was in the era between 2008-2014. Naguib Sawiris, after 2012, he started to stop his relations with North Korea because most of the leaders that he used to work with had been out of the power or had been executed even, according to him, because the new leader didn't like that there is licenses that important have been granted for a foreigner. So Naguib Sawiris lost most of his projects and most of his assets in North Korea, according to him. But what about the relations nowadays? According to the media, the relations also during President Sisi since 2014 had been sustainable and stable and good relation, but there was a lot of speculation in the Western media that this relation is so strong and dangerous, and it's something to do with weapons and something to do with weapon smuggling, and there's a lot of news that the Egyptian side is buying or mediate between the regimes and the North Koreans to buy North Korean weapons. But I didn't find anything really strong about this issue. In 2015, Egypt refused to vote again against sanctions in the UN against North Korea. In 2015, the President Sisi had sent personal invitation to the North Korean leader to come to the inauguration ceremony of the new Suez Canal project, and in this ceremony there was many world leaders, the French president, the Arabic Gulf leaders, and this was unique actually, that there is invitation to the North Korean leader for this kind of important event. But he didn't come. He sent his parliament speaker Kim Yong-nam, according to the news. And you can see here in the New York Times, they talk about the relation between Egypt and North Korea, that it's dirty, there is dark side, there's things like this. But if it's so, the Americans will never sell you weapons, and the Americans will never grant you partnership in very sensitive industries, and the South Koreans. If we have that kind of strong relation with North Korea, why South Korea have very good relations with us nowadays? According to Yonhap news agency, which is the official South Korean news agency, Egypt had achieved one of the biggest armed deals with South Korea, one of the biggest in South Korean history, with Hanwha Defense, which is the biggest defense company in South Korea. We will take K-11, K-9, K-10 tanks. K-11, it's autonomous robotic ammunition supplier tank, and drones, and also there is, according to the same news agency, there is Samsung factory in Egypt will make massive expansion, LG factory will make also another expansion, and things like this. So I don't think that the relation with North Korea is that dangerous nowadays. Otherwise, why South Korea is motivated to develop its relation with us also? So this is the topic, and I was very keen to share this idea with you. And you, what's your opinion about this? I'm very keen to hear from you in the comments down. Thank you very much, and see you.